parlez-vous la langue de l'art? Let's find out. Okay, so chapter 4 discusses the language of art, aka the visual elements. And the visual elements are how we can communicate with art. So if art were a dessert, the visual elements would be like the ingredients available for the cook to use. These key elements consist of line, shape, mass, light, value, color, texture, and space. And all of these elements play an important role in how we experience art. Okay, so the first element discussed is line. Line is often used by artists to communicate direction or motion, but it can also be used to communicate feelings or ideas, which I think is pretty incredible. Some artists use line as a way of rendering the contour line of a form, what we would call an outline. Lines can also be used to lead a viewer's eye through an artwork. Like invisible arrows, lines subconsciously lead the viewer's eye throughout a work of art, and they can direct the viewer's gaze. Check out this painting by Watteau. He leads our eyes all over this island of love. Another great example of an artist using leading lines to direct the viewer's gaze can be seen in this painting by Theodore Géricault called The Raft of the Medusa. This painting depicts the tragic, true story of these victims of this shipwreck the moment that they see a rescue ship in the distance. When you look at the angles of Géricault's paintings, you can see that he's using the lines to create two different centers of interest. This creates a tension in the work, similar to the tension that you probably feel when you watch a film. And while the lines of the bodies pull you to look towards the upper right, there are also other lines leading you to the left. If you get a chance to see this in the Louvre, it's so large, it just immerses you into the painting, and you can feel that kind of tension, and you can feel the wind blowing you one way, and you certainly get the sense that there's these conflicting ideas of hope and despair happening all in this one painting. The next element discussed in the chapter is shape. Shape is basically just a two-dimensional form or area that has been defined by some type of boundary. In 3D art, we would use the term mass to describe this kind of volume of space. Now, artists can use shape to communicate so many things. If an artist wants to use circles and squares and triangles, we would deem these types of shapes as being more geometric. Or the artist can use what we call organic shapes, which are shapes that have kind of irregular form to them, or forms that you would kind of see in nature. And when the artist creates a drawing or a sculpture, they not only have to be aware of what's happening in these positive shapes, they also have to be aware and consider what's happening in the negative shapes or the negative space of any given work of art. Barbara Hepworth's sculptures also show that some interesting things can happen when you consider the negative space. Designers also have to be aware of what's happening in the negative space. As you can see here in this example of this design that's made out of stars, but there's an M that then appears in the negative space. Artists also use shapes as a way of controlling the composition or the layout of the work. Some artists like their work to kind of have a circular flow through it. In the Renaissance, the triangle was the shape of the hour, and so many of the famous Renaissance works that you know use this triangle as the main dominant shape that controls the composition. Another important element for artists to consider is the concept of light. Light affects our experience of art in so many ways. In fact, entire cathedrals were built around the concept of light and its effects. And some artists have gone so far as to make light the center stage of their own art and their own work. Check out this work by Doug Wheeler, who uses neon tubing lights to frame this perfect white space and make viewers feel like they're staring into this floating void. Talk about an aesthetic experience. Another important element of art that ties into this notion of light is the concept of value. Now, value is just a term used to describe the different shades of light and dark that you see in a work of art. And believe it or not, value can make a big difference in how you perceive and experience a work of art. Artists like Caravaggio liked to use extreme dark and light values, which made his works just seem very dramatic, and it reminds us of the type of extreme lighting that we see in theater. But artists don't always have to work with value in order to make their works pop. In fact, the Impressionists often worked with a very limited range of dark and light values, and you can notice that when you see their works in black and white. So instead of using value, the Impressionists used color to make their works pop. Color is a very important element of art, and artists can use it to communicate all kinds of things. Studies show that color affects you in ways that you may not even understand or realize, both physically and psychologically. Interior designers often study color theory and brain research in order to create specific atmospheres for what they're trying to achieve. That's why restaurants usually have a kind of warmer interior, because it's proven that the color red makes people feel hungrier, and therefore they consume more food. I actually heard about this prison that was having a lot of discipline issues, and so they decided to paint the color of their walls this calming shade of pink. And according to this study, the number of fights dramatically decreased, and it just kind of demonstrates how color can affect us more than we even realize. For a long time, artists have been very mindful of the ideas that certain colors communicate. For example, throughout most of history, the Virgin Mary is often wearing the color blue. And that's not because she didn't own any other colors, but blue is a color that's often associated with nature, royalty, and peace. And that's why the historic artists chose to represent Mary because of these ideas. Well, we can't talk about color without taking a look at the color wheel. As many of you know, there are 3 primary colors, which are the 3 colors that, when mixed together, they can make the rest of the colors on the color wheel. So if you could only paint with 3 colors, I would go for these, okay? Now, the color wheel is helpful because it helps us understand how colors relate to each other. For example, all of the colors on the left, they tend to reflect the sun, and so they're called the warm colors. While all the colors on the right, they remind us of the sea and the sky and shade, and so we call these the cool colors. Now, some artists have used color groups from the color wheel to create art that harmonizes well, or colors that sing well. Now, these colors that tend to go well together are called color schemes. And it's really fascinating to study how colors work well together and how they harmonize together. Let's just say that there's a reason why you can't wear that shirt with those pants, okay, buddy? Now, this week, you're going to take a look at some of those color schemes and learn about which colors tend to play well together. And although these aren't like hard and fast rules, just like music and how, music tends to sound better when the notes harmonize, so color tends to look better when the colors seem to harmonize. Now, one popular color scheme is the use of complementary colors. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel. And scientists began noticing in the 19th century that when you take these 2 opposite colors and you place them side by side, the colors tend to seem brighter and more vibrant. And they also tend to sit well together and to look nice. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of businesses use complementary colors for their branding. I mean, that's bright. And hey, did you notice I even use complementary colors for our class branding? Now, one of my favorite artists who use complementary colors is a 19th century artist by the name of Georges Seurat. You probably recognize this popular painting called Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Yacht, which he dedicated 2 years of his life to creating. Made out of tiny little dabs of color, the viewer's eye actually mixes the color from a distance. allowing for some of the most purest color mixing a painter could create. So although he put dabs of yellow and blue next to each other, our eyes see green from far away. And this is long before the word pixels was even around. Now, he was so concerned about the intensity of his work that he even painted this border around the painting that laced each internal color with its complementary color on the border. Now, there are all kinds of other color schemes that artists use to communicate their thoughts. There's analogous, there's triadic, monochromatic, and this week you're going to look at those different color schemes. But the big idea is that color communicates a lot. And if you can learn how color talks, you can use it as a tool to communicate all different kinds of things. Now, moving on from color, another important element of art that artists have at their disposal is texture. Texture actually plays a huge role in how we experience the world. And humans are just naturally drawn to textures and patterns. And so artists have been able to use and communicate texture in lots of different ways. Artists have created works with actual texture, like you can see here in this painting by Vincent van Gogh. In the painting, you can see he's painted so thick that the surface has a physical texture to it. Here's a contemporary sculpture, which is called prayer mat, and when you look closely, you can see the actual texture of a bunch of pins that make up this prayer mat. But texture doesn't have to be physical. It can also be implied through imagery, through patterns, and so many artists create texture this way. Along with texture, another essential element of art is the artist's use of space. Now, obviously, when we talk about sculpture or architecture, the artist's use of space is fundamental to how we experience it, how we walk around it and how we encounter it. But for an artist working in 2 dimensions, space is considered when trying to create an illusion of depth. Now, one can create the illusion of depth by using the rules of linear perspective, which was an exciting discovery back in the Renaissance. Now, with linear perspective, artists could make things appear to recede in the distance by making parallel lines converge all at a single point in the horizon. It's often called the vanishing point. Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper, is an excellent example of this use of linear perspective. I mean, check out how all of the lines converge at a single point at Christ's head. I mean, talk about being a line leader. Another way that artists show depth is by the use of atmospheric perspective. It's been established that if you want to make something appear further away, you can make it paler, more blue, and less distinct. That's how Albert Bierstadt was able to make his mountains look miles away, even though we're experiencing it all on just a single flat surface. The last element of art discussed in the chapter is the artist's use of time and motion. Time plays a major factor in art, especially for the Impressionists. In the 1870s, the Impressionists became obsessed with capturing life as it was happening. They didn't want their work to look as if it was staged in a studio. They wanted all of their paintings to be filled with the energy, the motion, and the life that they experienced all around them. Check out the energy that fills this painting by Renoir. Renoir gives us a glimpse into his world, and by looking at the painting, we feel like we're actually there. The lighting, the colors, they're all so consistent, we can almost decipher what time of day it is. Now that's an artist that's concerned with time and motion. Another artist concerned with the idea of motion was the artist Alexander Calder. In the 1930s, Calder brought motion into his sculpture by making works that were called mobiles. Using abstract forms suspended by thin pieces of wire, Calder's mobiles actually move. And if you watch them, you can actually see how they respond to the air that's circulating in the room. It's really, really cool. Movement also informs the works of contemporary artists like Theo Jansen, who made these really cool kinetic sculptures that walk around entirely on their own. Really neat stuff. You should check out his TED Talk. All right, so I know we talked about a lot, but there are just so many weapons in the artist's arsenal. I mean, line, shape, light, value, color, texture, space, motion. I mean, these are all things that the artist can use to create visual experiences and just to express themselves more fully. And you know, the more I create art, the more I realize that there's just so much within the elements of art to unpack and to learn about. And it's exciting because I know that, you know, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be learning this language and learning how to communicate my thoughts better through the visual arts. So that kind of sums up chapter 4 and the language of art, the visual elements of art. Hope you learned something, and I guess we'll see you next time. Au revoir.